Welcome back to the Men of Issachar podcast. We've got a man down this week because of illness. Jeff can't be with us because he's had strep, so throw up a prayer on his and his family's behalf. Mr. Josh Abbotoy stops in to chat with us. Josh is a graduate of Union University, but after that he attended Harvard Law School. So he is someone whose viewpoint and outlook are very informed and full of wisdom. I hold his opinion personally in high regard, and I even call on him professionally. So I trust what he has to say. He sits on the board of a classical Christian school and has clout in a lot of well-respected circles. Some I would even go as far as to say worldwide circles. So sit back and relax for this fun conversation where we touch on a few different subjects that pertain to Ivy League schools, education, new elites, and a few other subjects. Terry Gant, Jeff Wright, in spirit, and myself, Jason Gall, strive to be men of Issachar.
Welcome back to the Men of Issachar podcast. I'm Terry here with Jason. Jeff, our usual co-host, is not with us today. He's out sick. Hope for him to get back with us soon. We are here today with a guest, Josh Abbotoy, and we are going to be discussing elite education and should Christians be pursuing this. So I think that we're going to have to lay the groundwork with some defining of terms. So I'm going to hand this off to Josh here and see. We could talk about defining elite education. You want to break that into some pieces and tell us what you think?
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. So elite education, that's a compound word, compound phrase. I think to understand that, you got to take it apart a little bit. What are elites? And, Christians, we don't talk about elites a lot, like in our churches or in a lot of Christian institutions. It's not elitist, like it's not a view that that elites are like the best or the most holy or something like this. But it's a more, to say that somebody is elite or to say that we're trying to do elite education in a particular place is to recognize that some people are going to rise to the top in terms of their abilities and their character, and that's going to make them more fit to be leaders. It's going to make them better leaders in their local communities and all the way up to large institutions or national, level political issues. Elites are, but just in the simplest way to put it, like elites are people who have like excellent virtues that make them fit for leadership. And so education, elite education, then I think is to say, one, like how do you prepare somebody to become an excellent leader, to have the virtues that a leader needs, but then also like what kind of stuff, what content of their education should a leader have? And that gets really interesting. I know, those of you who study the classical education, perhaps more than I have, I'm aware this is like a very like dense literature. There's a lot of books that can be read about it, but just at a fundamental level, like there's a big choice. Like, American elites at like a standard school right now, they're reading like, I don't know, Fahrenheit 451 or whatever the latest fad is, and making a choice of saying, hey, if we're trying to do elite education, our kids are going to be reading Cicero and Xenophon and Thucydides. That's a very different kind of choice that's ultimately going to result in like a different kind of leader, different character that you produce. But yeah, I think elite education, to say that we're doing it, I think is to say that we understand that some people are going to be elites and they are going to be leaders. And as such, we need to think explicitly about how we want to be training them and what the content should be.
All right. So, nature abhors a vacuum, and I think that's true for leadership, if not more than anywhere else. It's certainly as much as anywhere else. So we're going to have an elite, and we can think about this in a wide variety. We have our cultural elites, we have our educational elites, we have our political elites, we have our religious elites, and so we're speaking here in pretty broad terms. And what we're getting at is we have in mind people who are leaders in these fields, who are creating culture, who are creating the conditions for society, I guess, maybe if I could put it that way. So you went to Harvard, and one of the questions that I think a lot of people may have now, because everybody still thinks of Harvard and Yale and Princeton and the other Ivy Leagues and other schools like those are still turning out highly educated people. I think that's still the case. I know that some of their reputations have suffered a little bit in recent years due to DEI and woke stuff. So my question would be, if I'm interested in cultivating an elite young person, a student, should a goal be an Ivy League school, or is there an alternative, or how should we, what's the best? I guess maybe what's the best track to get somebody into this kind of elite world?
I don't think there's one track or one. There's no one size fits all best approach. 20 years ago, I think it was kind of more clearly the case that if a young person wanted to get done with school and get into leadership, whether it be, vaulting right into working in high levels in politics or think tanks or jumping into really elite businesses like working at Goldman Sachs or something, the path to that was going to an Ivy League school or something equivalent to an Ivy League. Or if you were in tech, you wanted to go work at like the best startup, you go work at, go to Stanford or you go to MIT. I think that's probably softened a little bit in certain fields, but it's not gone. And now, all of that being said, things can change really quickly, like in social conditions and what makes people competitive, And so, as we were talking about before we went live, AI is creating incredible disruption right now in a lot of different industries. And so, there's a lot of people who've hyper specialized in certain white collar laptop jobs that are being obsolesced. Or, the way it's really going to be felt is there's a lot of simpler, repetitive work that usually like early career people tend to do, like at law firms or investment banks and that sort of thing. And that kind of work is especially where AI is going to contract those fields. So as that happens, these elite schools that are kind of like the pathways to those desirable fields, like in certain cases, the cost benefit analysis shifts a little bit. But, like that's just purely on like what are the benefits side, right?
Sure.
On the cost side, these, even though almost all of the Ivy Leagues were founded as Christian schools, they're today like not all that friendly or hospitable to conservative Christians. And probably the real challenge is there's not really strong conservative Protestant like student organizations in these places.
Okay.
In most of them. So, there's a challenge, I think, with young kids going into these environments, and it's the faculty, but then it's also the peer pressure and the lack of having like basically a conservative Christian support group to plug into that in many cases can pull people away from the faith or at least cause them to compromise. So all of which boils down to like if you had like a really ambitious kid who was really well grounded in their faith, like very confident intellectually and a little bit disagreeable, not a follow the herd type. I think an Ivy League is a really good choice for a kid like that. And it does, even to this day, offer some opportunities that are probably going to be almost impossible to get other places.
Okay. So you think that's a viable option for a Christian family wanting to raise Christian young people into Christian adults. And we would further add, or at least Josh would further add, that that's a good place to do that and have those adults turn into an elite, kind of enter that elite class and be able to be in a position to rule well, to operate companies well, those kinds of things.
Yeah, but let me caveat that a little bit. You shouldn't. I don't think Ivy Leagues are doing the lion's share of education anymore. I think that they've gotten much more specialized, and they've gotten more focused on getting kids into good jobs rather than like educating well-formed, well-rounded individuals. So that I would say, like, it's what's the Ivy League doing for them? It's getting them access to opportunities. It's helping them get a good network. But it's probably a lot of the most important intellectual formation is not going to happen. The kind of formation that we would probably say we want a leader to have in terms of moral formation, character formation, that's not going to happen in an Ivy League. It's really much more about skills now.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's have a hypothetical student, right? We got a kid that has all these criteria that you established. He's not a follower. He's going to stick to his guns. He's disagreeable. He's intelligent enough, talented enough, has the resume to get into an Ivy League school. How do we make sure that kid continues moral formation and, raising up into a virtuous elite, into a kind of elite that we would like to be in charge of things?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing would be what's happened in that child's life before they turned 18. I mean, in pre-modern times, you were an adult well before you turned 18, right? So I tend to think like a lot of the cake is baked before 18. So you're leaning on what's the formation, the education that's happened up until that point. That's probably the most important thing.
So the
home,
Ivy
in their
League kind of
school.
becomes almost like a crucible, right, to test this.
Yeah, no, totally. But then secondarily to that, like, okay, I mean, I think the thing you definitely would have to say is that conservative Christians generally need better support groups in these Ivy Leagues. That would be, I when I went through Harvard Law School, so I actually went to a Southern Baptist school for undergrad, Union in West Tennessee, but went to Harvard for law school. And when I went through, there was an evangelical group there, was not, how can I say this? The topics that they tended to cover were things like, hey, like, why does the Bible teach us that we have to pursue immigration justice? Or things like that. It was very sort of lefty evangelical.
Yeah.
And a
Sounds
lot of
like
the
cultural followers, really.
Yeah, like a lot of the Christian groups at Ivies are going to be like that. In my particular case, I ended up falling in and making friends with Catholics mainly because they had more intellectual confidence. They were a little bit more disagreeable. They weren't intimidated by being around an Ivy League. So not all, but many of the evangelicals I knew were kind of
squishy, perhaps.
Well, they were squishy, but deeper than that, they were kind of embarrassed. They were kind of insecure.
Okay.
And so, like, when they didn't really bring their faith into the law, like into what they were doing professionally, they were, and to the extent that they did, they tried to emphasize points where, in their view, the faith overlapped with, like, the priorities of the consensus views on the campus.
Okay.
But, on the flip side, like, the Catholic students, they had read Aquinas, they had been through, like, rigorous theological training, and they had an intellectual confidence and a network. And so we, if I could just wave a wand and make it happen, they're like, okay, how do we get very rigorous, very intense, very confident, like, Protestant student organizations at these institutions? Because I think that's direly needed.
Well, is that an opportunity? Like, I mean, we're talking about wanting to see elite formation. I mean, is this an opportunity for somebody to start, making? It makes me think of Charlie Kirk, right? Of course, he started Turning Point, which I don't know if Turning Point's kind of the idea. I don't know if Harvard has a Turning Point chapter, but this is a guy who was an evangelical. He was clearly very secure in his faith, and probably had the intellectual chops to do something like Harvard, Yale, whatever. Don't know what his IQ was, but he always struck me as very smart. So, and I don't know that anybody is saying, well, you got to start something like Turning Point, but is there an opportunity? Is there a missing need? Is there a demand there for a robust evangelical student organization that can support this kind of thing in the Ivies?
Yeah, I think there is. And one of the interesting things is that it's at a lot of these places, it's not like a departure from their own tradition. It's actually like a return. I mean, you could you could really anchor it in the deep history of a lot of these places.
Right.
Harvard was founded to educate Puritan ministers. Yale was founded to educate Presbyterian ministers. Well, they're Puritan ministers. So too was Princeton. Go down the list. The founders of these people were deeply religious. Cotton Mather instrumental in founding Yale. And so, there's there's a deep history, and I think in one sense, we need to find a way to cultivate a recognition with American Christians that we are the torchbearers of the civilization that was capable of producing places like Harvard and Princeton. Not necessarily the people running those institutions now, but we're the ones who've kept the flame alive of Christianity in this country, of self-governance and virtue and all of the things that made our founding possible to begin with. We're still carrying that torch, and in some ways we're the rightful heirs of those sorts of institutions.
Right.
Even though we obviously are very far from having serious influence there now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So with our definition of elites, we were talking before we started about the idea of self-consciously trying to create an elite class. And I'm an educator, K through 12 education, and at a classical school. And classical schools are a mixed bag with regards to the kind of their adherence to sort of post-war democratic liberalism. Everybody's the same, and the education should be in such a way that anybody can do it. So I guess the question that anybody can answer this one would be, is classical education for everyone? Is classical education for the creation of an elite class, or is that just maybe a happy coincidence that we hope for, but it's not necessarily a goal?
I would say it would be a high bar. It's just a higher bar that we strive for. It's that degree of excellence, like you were talking about, Josh, with the colleges, the Ivy League colleges. They carried a high bar of excellence, and that's what's made them distinguishable from all the other universities throughout history. Is they had a higher bar. Mm-hmm. Excellence draws excellence. I just think that we need to create our own standards.
Yeah.
I think we are capable of unique excellence. I think we can sift through the standards that they've created and refine that even more so and make it even better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Ivy Leagues are very self-conscious about the fact that they are training elites. They'll get you in there, and the first day they'll say, okay, welcome to America's elite. We're here to teach you how to be an elite. And they say that in very differing ways, but that is the basic message. They're not quiet about it. And I do think I will be. It's not just post World War II. It's a little un-American in a very deep way, and it in this way. When we were founded, the people who first came to this country and settled it, we were from top to bottom of society exceptionally elite. Everybody was a high performer from top to bottom. We were a nation of elites, and that's why. I mean, when we founded when we were founded as a country, John Adams, and a lot of the other guys, they would say, look, most people are not capable of self-governance, but we are, and why it wasn't an arrogance, but it was a gratitude and a recognition that the people who founded this country were very literate. They were they had exceptional moral character that had been shaped by, frankly, Christian morality for hundreds of years. And so there's an old American egalitarianism that does sort of say we're all elites and we're all, in some sense, we're all equal. There's minor differences and some people do a little better than others, but the more modern, I think, social stratification and, we have levels of poor education and frankly just barbaric behavior in our society that couldn't have even been imagined 200 years ago. And so now, yes, I think as a basic matter of realism, we kind of have to say our kids are probably going to be elites. They're very likely to be high performers, have higher character than the average American. And it's not to be boastful or to be arrogant. It's just reality.
But isn't that desirable?
It is. I think it is. Yes, because I mean, we want kids have good moral formation to be the ones leading society.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can remember at the last conference for the Association of Classical Christian Schools, there was a Leaders' Day conference, and they brought in a really great panel of speakers to do individual talks, and then they did kind of a discussion. One of them was Clifford Humphrey, and I would encourage you to read. There's a group of guys that have gotten together. They call themselves agoge, which is, I think it's Greek for like struggle or striving, something like that. I can't recall exactly. But if you can go find their written work at agogeclassical.com, or .org rather, it's .org. And at that conference, there was a Q&A panel, and I don't remember what the question even was, but Clifford's answer really struck me. And he said, classical education is for anyone, but it's not for everyone. And I have used that several times in the sense that, like, in America, it's classical education is a growing thing. And it's growing because it's being recognized as excellent. And parents, whether they want to admit it or not, in many cases are like, I want my kids to achieve much. I want them to even surpass me, to have opportunities, to be able to do what they wish to do. And that requires a certain kind of education to be able to take on challenges and meet new things. And so not everybody wants to do classical, and that's okay, but anyone could do classical if they get on board and do it. And the ones who select into that, I think that says something about their potential to become elite in a society, that they are wanting something different than the current mass production education we've got. And we're going to talk about this a lot soon. We've got another episode coming up about classical education. So we knew there'd be a little bit of crossover. But I just, your anecdote about how Americans were very well read. I read somewhere that the literacy rate at the time of the Revolution was somewhere like 97%. Another anecdote to kind of back this up: when the first settlers came into Tennessee, into the Watauga settlement area, they went for like years without a government at all because there was no crime. They didn't have a need for any kind of justice of the peace or anything. Eventually, people came over and started stealing horses, and they had to institute a sheriff and things like that. But they didn't need it before then because all of the settlers who came across came knowing this is going to be tough. It's going to be hard work. They brought their books with them. Their kids they grew up reading Robinson Crusoe at 12 years old or whatever, and things like that of that nature. And so, yeah, they're out there chopping firewood during the day, but they're reading the King James Bible in lengthy passages at night. They're sitting through sermons that are 2 hours long on Sundays. They're reading what we would consider in most schools today to be very advanced works for fun. And this was an elite group of people. And so this is kind of an American birthright in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I again, like, just harping on this point, American evangelicals and conservative Protestants in general, like, we're kind of defying gravity, like, even as, like, much of society, look at society today. We're very socially Darwinian, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we allow people to impoverish themselves with gambling. Like, why is that? Mm-hmm. It's odd that it's even legal, but we allow people increasingly access to more and more drugs, marijuana, rampant, of course, pornography use, and then just simpler things like screen addiction. If you are born into a practicing, like, devout Christian family in this country, the chances that kind of stuff is going to get you off track are much lower.
Sure.
Conservative Christians in this country are above replacement rate in terms of having kids. They're doing it. The children of conservative Christians will be higher performing.
They will. Yeah.
And, the degree to which they're higher performing has a lot to do with how intentional I think we get about their education and, how much we're going to invest in it and, how high we set the bar.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into K through 12 classical education, it became pretty clear that if you set a high bar, that students tend to rise to it. And that's, there's going to be some who can't, and that's okay too. but asking them to do more tends, even if they don't quite get there, it tends to raise them up above what they think their ability is. And so holding a high standard for education and attainment and a desire to do those things. And then furthermore, teaching them why they should want that. You know, we don't want to raise a bunch of strivers who just want to climb the corporate ladder for their own sake. That's the moral formation component, right? Where you want to bring kids along and teach them like, hey, look, you're going to inherit a society and it has rules and somebody has to rule it. And you should want that. And for the first time in, I don't know, maybe my whole life I can think of, nowadays, maybe one of the first times in that I can think of where I would look at a kid who was ambitious, who was capable, and say, you should consider government service as a career field. That's a legitimate option for you. Because up to this point, I've thought, well, it's all just corrupt bureaucrats. And I'm looking at the current administration, and I'm thinking, there's a place for Christians to get involved here and to start shaping not just society in a holistic way, but like a policy way. Like you can, the way things are now.
There's never been a greater need.
Yeah, and there's kind of a hope there. And so I don't know. What do you think of that? What do you think about government service as a career path? Feel free to disagree, but
that changes, right? Politics change. It seems like they're changing more quickly every year now, right? I would say, at a broad level, I think that more and more power is going back to states right now.
Okay.
Our nation is very divided, which means there's a lot of gridlock at the federal level. I mean, even Trump, it was like he passed basically one big law since he's been in office, even though he's got majorities. And that was treated like some massive accomplishment, like Congress barely legislates anymore, all this stuff. The fight in D.C. is noble, and it's good when good people want to get into that. That's great. But there's a lot of, the corresponding thing is, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and there's a lot of need for effective leaders with the right commitments at the state level. States are actually much more corrupt than the federal government is, believe it or not, because the corporate lobby doesn't have a lot of competition. It has less competition at the state level. So, a lot of state legislators are part-time. They've got full-time jobs, and lobbyists will just write bills for them to pass. They need help with ideas. They need help coming up with good laws to pass. And so I think especially at the state level, there's really good opportunity and will be for years to come. The federal level is going to be up and down.
Sure.
You get Trump in there, then you get
who's the next guy. Yeah.
That just changes a lot. But the state level, there's going to be important work there for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
I even see a dividing line being drawn within parties. I think there's going to be either a new party emerge or a lot of refining of the conservative party. And that's going to happen soon. And I think that's where one of the big opportunities for, folks of faith can step in and refine that. Like we've been talking about in education, I think there's going to be a huge opportunity within politics to really refine that and make it something that, hasn't been seen for a long time, just because people are so used to corruption in politics. What if there was a party that, took a staunch stance against it? I think that would be huge.
Yeah, with the Epstein situation, which we won't get into much here, but it's causing more people to become more tired of the existing status quo. The documents that were released are a confusing mess, and it's difficult to know what to believe. But pretty much the trend that I've seen from almost everybody is we're kind of sick of the way it is, and so change may be coming. And now may be a good time, if you're interested in that, to jump into that.
To be fair, people in both parties have gotten black eyes from Epstein.
Yeah.
There are big name conservatives have gotten black eyes in there, as well as, of course, liberals. It's a time of realignment politically. Trump was a realignment guy. He's changing. He's bringing new people into the party, and he's scaring some people off. And And whenever there's coalitional realignment, like as conservative Christians, we're like a plurality of the voters in the Republican Party, but we haven't really historically, I don't think we've gotten the concessions we need out of the Republican Party platform relative to what we should be getting.
I agree.
Given our numbers. And so I think like, you want to talk about Christian leadership. What would a Christian elite do? Like right now, a Christian elite should be sitting at the table with other parts of the Republican coalition, like forging a coalition, but also negotiating to make sure that our highest priorities are getting represented in the GOP platform. And I don't think we've been great at this. I think the GOP platform in recent years has softened on abortion issues. It's softened on gay marriage, softened on a number of other issues where I think we could probably have a stronger result if we had elites that were actually in the room. I mean, the elephant in the room here is that, a bunch of evangelical so-called elites, wanted nothing to do with Trump and, have basically said or done things, made choices that made it so that they have absolutely no voice in the Republican Party going forward or in the conservative movement. Russell Moore, right? I mean, David French. I mean, these were household names that lots of Christians read and looked up to 15 years ago. And today, they're nothings in the conservative movement.
They're locked out.
Right. And, so where do we, who are the replacements for those guys? How do we raise up new people who are going to be like effectively negotiate for our interests in coalitional politics?
Sure. So what, and I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but are there organizations that are working to that end? I mean, I'm thinking of we mentioned Turning Point. We mentioned, or we didn't mention them, but like Heritage. Are there people doing this? Like if there's somebody who's interested in pursuing that, where should they look?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too self-promotional here. Like this is a question, a problem that American Reformer really cares about.
Yeah, we actually just carried a symposium. I think we have one more to go, but it's a long one. It's like 8 or 9 articles on this exact topic, right? The creation of an evangelical elite. Where are the evangelical elites?
Heritage is great. Heritage is it's sitting on top of a complicated coalition. It's got a lot to manage. And I would say that on the whole, Heritage is heavily weighted towards Catholics. Again, I go back to my law school example. The Catholics had good presence there. Catholics are very organized and very strong in the national conservative movement in a way like that Protestants don't have a corresponding strength. I think now there are some great Protestants at places like Heritage, but it's not, we don't punch to our weight in these rooms today. And so, I think American Reformer is one of the few organizations I know that's really working on solving this at an elite level, like with our fellowship programs and, of course, what we publish as well.
Yeah, that fellowship program opens up pretty soon. So, I mean, not to intentionally self-promote, but if there's people out there listening to this that are interested in this idea, and you may be looking for a way to get a toe in the water on this, there's a fellowship program that American Reformer does every year. Reading heavy. There's some writing that goes along with it. There's a retreat, and you'll be in a group with a bunch of other guys that have their sights set on this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the Cotton Mather Fellowship, named after Cotton Mather. And like, let's just stop for a moment and think about this guy, Cotton Mather. In one way, you could kind of see him as like the first American. He was born in America, helped to found Yale, helped to innovate one of the first inoculation methods ever used, pastored a church for a long time, wrote a wonderful history book on the early history of New England, like maybe the top primary source, the Magnalia Christi Americana, great work. And then he was also involved in one of the first revolutions, so in New England in 1688. Really interesting polymathic character.
Renaissance man,
well-rounded. I think he's like a good model, and kind of reminds people like this is what if you're an American Christian, like this is your heritage, your history. Like we had very impressive people in our past who like built the foundations of so much of what we enjoy now.
Right. So, we're thinking all of us in here are parents, and we may have parents listening. Is this a goal? Is this something that we should be wanting for our kids? Should we be hoping that they rise to elite status? And I guess that may be different depending on the child, but let's say hypothetically you've got one that may seem to fit the bill, could do it. Do we want them to stay below the radar? I guess maybe this is just an opinion for each individual parent, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Would you like to see your kids rise up to be elites, statesmen, corporate bosses, those kinds of things?
I definitely would. I mean, I see there are differences in my kids, and I see some of my kids. I'm not going to draw them out because they'll probably listen to this, but some of my kids are more suited to this than others.
Sure.
But the ones that are, then yes, I mean, I'm going to, prepare them as much as possible to. I don't know God's plan, but
sure.
I'm going to give them all the tools that they need to do a cumbersome task like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jason said. I'll just add though that it's in a classical Christian school, to an extent, every kid that goes there is going to get this imprint of character formation in a particular kind of education. They're going to experience a high bar, and even if they're not everybody's going to have the skills to become a world famous politician like that. You've got to have next level instincts and charisma. Some of that you're just born with, and it's really hard to train. But all of them can participate in varying degrees to creating an elite counterculture, like they're going to, like, hopefully, Lord willing, if this whole educational movement is successful, there's going to be leading citizens in politics and business and culture who have a classical Christian education. And there's going to be people who don't quite rise to the level of leadership, but they're going to be fanning out into different parts of society, like reinforcing norms, perpetuating the culture that we're trying to do here. And they're going to be integral parts of building that culture. They're still going to be high performers, and they're still going to have a kind of elite education, a kind of elite formation, even if they're not like world-class at a certain thing, right?
Sure. Yeah, that
so,
makes sense.
And especially if, as we said before, like the children of Christians are increasingly likely in the coming years to be high performers. I think the current numbers say there's about 50 million kids K through 12 in America, of which about 5 million are being homeschooled or sent to Christian schools. 10% of the forthcoming population. Now, the share that's in a classical Christian school is smaller than that, sure. But, if you get 10% that's being protected to some degrees from some of the worst excesses of modern society, they're getting some good character formation, that's going to leave a mark on American society in a way that demographers and that's going to be measurable, like big impact. Yeah. And so all of the stuff we do to build culture around that is going to has a chance to end up becoming a marker of like high status. Like, hey, we want to be associated with that. We want to be part of that culture because they're good, they're excellent, they're leading the country well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking about the demographics of your conservative Christian group, and I don't have any stats in front of me, but I'm going to make a few speculations here. I imagine that families tend to be not broken as often. I imagine that they tend to have larger families. I imagine that they tend to be more stable in a lot of other ways that are, these aren't things that you would think of as a part of the education in the sense that they don't learn this at school. And yet I still think that sets kids up for long-term success in performance terms, right? Like, what can they do? They're coming from churches that believe rightly. They're coming from families that are together. They have lots of siblings. They know how to cooperate. They learn a lot of skills that are kind of hard to teach in a classroom setting, but that you learn through other ways. And I can't help but wonder how much even those little things that we don't really even think about as part of their education, quote unquote, are going to help set them up for long-term success in the formation of a cultural kind of bulwark.
I mean, one of the massive like emerging divides in American life is between populations that are having kids and populations that aren't having kids. And, you know, on the whole, I mean, obviously there's exceptions, but on the whole, conservative Christians are getting married and having kids. Not as much as, you know, really ideally we would be, but we're doing pretty well. We're doing a lot better than normal American society, which is now below replacement rate in terms of fertility. Like, it's a big problem. I mean, we, you know, an economy that's shrinking is not like if your population's shrinking, your economy is probably not growing. A lot of things. How do you fund Social Security, right? Like all these problems start emerging. And really worryingly, like a lot of developed countries that have had, you know, think of like South Korea or Japan, their total fertility rates drop below 1. They've thrown so much money and so much brain power trying to just inch that up to, can we just get it back to 1? Can we get it to 1.2, which is still way below replacement rate?
Right.
And they can't do it. It's a very tough problem. But the divide, you know, you think about it, I mean, there's a lot of people. You're a millennial, I think. Are you a millennial?
Yeah.
I'm a millennial. I mean, half our generation will be like only children, or maybe they have one sibling. They don't have kids. Like about half our generation won't have kids. And think about how their whole life trajectory starts getting different. So once you're 40 or 50, it's a very lonely life trajectory. It's very tragic in a lot of ways. But, you know, a huge chunk of society is going to be doomed to a lot of loneliness later in life. You know, whereas, yeah, like on the flip side of that, if you've got healthy families that have strong connections, they're helping each other, right? Maybe parents are helping their kids when they're trying to get their first house. And, you know, and then maybe the kids are helping the parents when the parents get old. There are like all these durable, permanent advantages that you just have, and you maybe don't even think about that much when you're part of a population group that's having a lot of kids. So yeah, that's I think that's a major factor that will get increasingly important in the coming years.
Yeah, stable family life and stable home life and the things that come with that.
Yeah.
So we had talked about the Ivy Leagues, and we've been talking a little bit about classical education. We know that there's been some folks trying to, I don't know if they would call it this, but I can't help but wonder if there's a goal to approach higher education at least and say, well, the Ivies are woke and most state universities are woke or paused or whatever. So we need an alternative, high elite level creation kind of educational institution. And I've got a couple in mind. I don't necessarily want to call them out by name, but is this a viable strategy? I mean, is this something Christians should want to do? In addition to, like, you know, Josh, we've already heard your opinion that the Ivies should be considered a legitimate option for the right kind of student. But, you know, is this kind of like a, you know, two-front war here where we can do both, or is this just a waste of time? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think you need to do an all of the above approach. You know, I guess I'll name a couple examples.
Okay.
Well, here's a good one, and we'll not step on any toes. University of Austin.
Okay.
Founded by Joel Lonsdale in 2020, I think. Pretty much straight up as a protest against woke universities. Now, Joe Lonsdale is a billionaire, multi-billionaire. He got a lot, you know, he's got a big network of other billionaires who like the University of Austin. But I think it's illustrative of, you know, it's had some success, but I think it is illustrative of the difficulty, even when you have a bunch of billionaires lined up.
Sure.
You can't just you cannot create something that is equivalent to a Yale or a Princeton like that. I mean, the accumulated capital. I mean, even the capital, right? I mean, a place like Yale, you know, or Harvard, their endowment is a major hedge fund, essentially.
Sure,
They're over $50 billion in these endowments now. And then all the physical infrastructure, right? They have real estate in some of the best cities in America with buildings that were built 400 years ago by famous architects.
The aesthetic is
they've got the
unbeatable,
history,
yeah.
like, you know, all these presidents went to this school.
There's some unbuyable things.
The networking.
The network, the network effect around these things is incredibly thick. So I think we need to be realistic about what can be achieved with these like alternatives, right? Hillsdale's another one. I mean, Hillsdale's done well in recent years. It's now both University of Austin and Hillsdale are illustrative in the sense that, like I said, there's sort of like a sliding scale, right? Like you can go to the most elite institutions are not aligned with conservative Christianity, right? Mm-hmm. And then as you go down that scale, you get to a place like Hillsdale or University of Austin. Neither of them are like explicitly Christian schools. Hillsdale's, I think they say I don't know if they're Judeo-Christian, but they would basically say they're pro-Western civilization. They like Athens and Jerusalem, okay? But you can be an atheist and teach there and that sort of thing. They're not sectarian. University of Austin would be, much the same. So both of them, I'd say, are very friendly to Christians.
Okay.
But they're not Christian schools, and then you go further down the sliding scale and you start to get into institutions, Patrick Henry, Grove City College, New St. Andrews, you go down the list that are at the higher end academically of what Christian universities do, but have, fairly good commitments, So I think all of these, it's going to be a case by case.
Sure, yes. So the right kind of student may need to go to a New St. Andrews.
Yeah.
Totally. They may not be. This may be a kid who could hack it at Harvard or MIT. But maybe they aren't the curmudgeon who's going to disagree and hold their gun. So you want to send them somewhere where they're going to be steeped further in the culture that they've been raised in, and you've got these alternatives as good educational options for that.
Yeah, and I would even say, like, man, if you're from like I think like I've seen some kids who've like gone to NSA or something like that who maybe they have like their family has a really good family business, right? Mm-hmm. So they're going to go there. They're not, maybe they already have like access to elite networks and business opportunities through family connections. And they're really going to NSA for the character formation and the substance of the education. Mm-hmm. Same at these other Christian schools I've mentioned, for the kid who, grows up in a middle-class home in a rural area, going to an Ivy League is sort of like a short circuit to getting really good networks.
Well, I mean, we've seen that with our favorite vice president, right?
Yeah.
This is a guy who grew up in Appalachia in a poor area and not a great situation at home, and made his way to Yale. Is that right? Yale, right? Mm-hmm. And now he's the vice president. Now he's exceptional, and I think that people recognize that along the way. But I'm sure he would have had more headwinds had he not made his way to an Ivy League. He probably wouldn't be where he is, at least not yet.
It's where it's how he got his professional start, which, he came out of law school and went into the highest levels of the tech world, the venture scene. In there, he met a lot of, funders who would ultimately, help support his political career once he jumped from politics, from business into politics.
And, that's one of those things that you can't really buy. So the Ivies still have that in their pocket. So there's definitely some advantages to those. I'm trying to think. My favorite Hillsdale graduate is Mr. Eric Prince, but he's an interesting example too because he came from wealth already. His dad was a industrial kind of genius with I think he made engines first. I can't remember now, but did very well in business, and his son could have done anything that he wanted to, and so Hillsdale's where he picked to end up going. And, I don't know what kind of networking opportunities he would have got there, but here's a guy kind of like what you were saying that probably didn't need the networking, right? Like he probably had a lot of those contacts and opportunities already from his family connections. Maybe chose Hillsdale because he thought the education would be what he wanted rather than, I've got to enmesh myself with the elite class. I'm kind of already in that class. So that's kind of a counterexample I would put to somebody like J.D. Vance, who came from nothing more or less and became, got handed this. I say handed this like he didn't do anything. He did work for it, obviously, but this helped him. You can say that much at least.
I think this like discussion is good. Like we're getting on the table that it's a student by student assessment, and it's also like it's a cost benefit analysis where you're looking at a lot of factors. To put my cards on the table, like I kind of hope that by the time my kids are in college, like I've got a bit, that I'm part of businesses that really help, obviate the need to kind of short circuit the networking by going to an Ivy. Like, in other words, I hope that
You won't need
I hope that
then.
I can send my kids somewhere that's purely about character formation and the content of the education. It's not really about like, what place is going to help them get the best job. I'm hoping that me or my friend network has professional opportunities for them that, don't require them to go through an Ivy League.
Yeah.
And I think you will see more of that. I think more entrepreneurial folks are really thinking hard about, rather than giving the best years of their life to a Fortune 500 or some massive organization, I think they're thinking more about how can I build a business that I'm going to have more influence over, that can be a blessing to, my kids or people in the community, rather than,
Sure. So it's almost like, we're thinking, I can't make Harvard, right? But I could start a business that helps my network have a network. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
Kingdom building.
yeah. You could. I mean, and this is I'd say this is kind of one of the things that comes along with kingdom building. So that kind of brings me to shift gears just slightly. The concept of noblesse oblige, right? The idea that if you are elite or if you have kind of risen to a high level of society, financially, in power of some kind, that you have an obligation to nobility, that you should use your position to, if you're in a position of rule, you should rule well. You should rule for the common good of society. If you're in a position where you have a lot of wealth, you should use that well. If you own a company, you should be looking to make life good for the people that you know and opening doors. I mean, there's a company that is planning on coming here and into this area, and I've heard it said that their goal is to hire workers and pay them enough so that their wives can stay home and raise families if that's their desire. And that's exactly the kind of thing that I think of when I think of noblesse oblige. If they can do this thing, they can make people's lives better, and that's a core value of this company. So I think maybe that's kind of what you're getting at with this.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And that's kind of like a corresponding thing. Like, I think you should not talk about elite formation, without talking about the obligations that come along with elites. And I think that's probably part of the problem with like modern economy and modern America is that we have like a pretty selfish elite class that does not have accountability to any like particular community. Like maybe they're like, our elite class thinks of themselves as like citizens of the globe, which creates diffuse responsibility. I mean, they're very focused on problems like climate change. It's a theoretical collective action problem, very out there. But they don't really have a lot of accountability to like, some particular group of people that requires them to do like hard things. Mm-hmm. And, they don't have to, generally they can kind of insulate themselves from the effects that their policies have on their neighbors on the other side of town.
Sure. Yeah. It makes me think like if we could have a bunch of elites that are members of local churches, that would be a great, that's a great check. Cause you've got, what are you doing with your power? Not that the church necessarily needs to see your accounting books, but like, there's an admonition, an encouragement to, do this for the kingdom, to borrow Jason's term, like do this for the kingdom and the children of God and bless them in that way. But,
there's more of an accountability to the church. Mm-hmm. It makes it more familial. It's a relationship that has more, to use the same word again, just accountability. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're friends with the same group and you're all striving for the same purpose, you're going to get called out more. Sure. If you're breaking the morals or the ways of business, the mode of operation, you're going to get called out by your brother a whole lot more quickly than you would by somebody who's trying to impress you.
Yeah, sure. Which, elites are surrounded by sycophants, right? That's kind of one of the catches of it.
Yeah, no, this is accountability. It does require shared standards, for one thing. So that's part of, I think, why we don't get as much accountability on our elites is because we have like this kind of multicultural thing where like we don't share a lot of like fundamental social values. Like we have different values, but then like even. This is where like the school perform a function too, right? Because we all happen to attend the same church here, right? Like us three. But, this school has people from I don't know how many, but many different churches who come here. And there's a kind of community around this school, right? And then where there's also that's its own kind of accountability. And like this school is creating a bit of a counterculture. So it's aggregating up from like a church level to like a culture that is common across different churches. And then you aggregate even up from that, and you've got like a national classical Christian education movement, and that's like a whole nother level of aggregation. But that's kind of one of the, I guess, side benefits or utilitarian functions I like about classical Christian education is it's creating a real, like a thick, substantive counterculture where, kids are going to have common stories, narratives, their moral imagination is being shaped in a common way. And they're gonna have like a shared language, and they're gonna have shared values, and that's gonna make accountability better and more natural too.
Sure. Yeah. One of the interesting things we covered in a recent faculty meeting actually was the ACCS did a survey, and there were some academic questions on there about like how students are doing academically, but a lot of them were more like life questions, like how likely are you to have a homosexual friend? How likely are you to tell that person that you don't approve of that, like that you think that that's a sinful thing? How likely are you to be in church and to stay in church? Or do you do that? So they asked graduates and they asked current students, and there was a whole bunch of these questions. I think you can probably find this on the ACCS website, which is just classicalchristian.org, and you can probably poke around and find it. But they were very reluctant to initially release the survey, and the fear was that people were like, "Oh no, it must not have been very good." But they eventually put it out with the caveat that like we were worried about releasing this because our numbers look fake; they look too good, and there was some places where they were in kind of similar numbers with public schools and homeschools, and I think they compared college prep schools, evangelical schools, Catholic schools, public schools, and homeschools, and then ACCS specifically, classical schools. And many, many categories, they were, more than one standard deviation above everyone else in several things, or below if that's the case. It made it look very good. And it's the kind of things you're talking about, like it's world outlook on family, on church, on education itself, on your future plans, on like all these kinds of, it's very all-encompassing. And so it was a very encouraging thing to look at for us because we really value our program and we think that it's the best one. But it's always nice to see data to back up that a lot of what we want to see happen, which is primarily moral formation. And academic prep is an excellent side benefit of that. That is having some success, and this is kind of getting towards what you were talking about, like the families, the children of conservative Christian households are going to become high performers, and it isn't necessarily just because they get high ACT scores, although many do. It is because they're just prepared for life, and they have a good outlook. Their fidelity to their upbringing is strong. And I'm sure there's some horror stories where there's anecdotes where people didn't and things of that sort. But by and large, it's demonstrating itself to be a successful project.
And even like in a very simple way, there's all the positive stuff, but also there's just like harm prevention,
Sure, yeah.
Like in modern society, there's a lot of, traumatic stuff that kids get exposed to that they shouldn't be exposed to. And that, so just even like at a very simple baseline level. On this point, Scott Yenner wrote an article on that data.
Oh, okay.
Scott Yenner, he's a professor at Boise State and now leads the Simon Center at the Heritage Foundation as well. Great guy. But yeah, he wrote an article, I forget the title, but it was For American Reformer, digesting this data. And, the point of it there was like, there have been attempts over the years to demoralize proponents of Christian education. So like Christian education is hard. It's a sacrifice. The movement, I guess it started in the 70s, really took off in the 90s. There's a lot of people in California. It tended to spring up in places where the public schools were worst. And, parents were like, hey, like we gotta we got to opt out. We got to find a way to get our kids a better education, right? And even as that movement was gaining momentum, there's been a lot of high visibility mainstream press attacks on Christian education. Or whenever, if there's somebody who's in the faith and then they leave the faith, that gets spotlighted a lot to kind of, frankly, I think it's just an attempt to demoralize Christians and say, hey, the sacrifices that you're making, budgeting to pay for the private Christian school, it doesn't make a difference, but it's being attacked precisely because it really matters. And it really is making a difference.
Yeah.
And so I love that kind of data because we're often assaulted with random anecdotes of the one kid who, they went through Christian schools all the way through and how they turned out, as if that invalidates the approach. But the data is very clear. Classical, or really, any Christian education, but classical fares very well. It's generally going to, in most cases, it's going to do well for your kids.
Yeah. Being a product of the public schools and now being a part of the classical Christian education system, I see such a distinct difference and such benefit. We talked about we're going to do another show on that, but I think that it's just undeniable when you get into the meat and potatoes of it, how much benefit it allows the kids coming up in it. I would argue that it gives Ivy League-esque benefit to kids coming out of the classical Christian schools. It prepares them so much more vibrantly than public education, I think, even can. I think their hands are tied at some points. They're exposed to things, to a methodology of teaching that is, in my opinion, just far superior. So I'm encouraged by all this. I'm encouraged by the things we've been talking about. Who our kids are going to be beholden to? Are our kids going to be beholden to fortune and fame? Is that what they're going to desire? Or are they going to desire things of the kingdom? And I think if they come up through the classical Christian schools, their eyes and their minds are set on things of the kingdom. Mm-hmm. And that's where the biggest difference is. They're able to see the difference where kids coming through public schools are conditioned to worldly standards. So
Sure.
that's what they're beholden to naturally. That's what their reflexes react to, where our kids are able to see the difference. They're able to speak both languages and to traverse both. I think that's a big difference. What do you think about that?
Well, I think this reminds me again of the talk from Clifford Humphrey and the other guys, Colin Redimer and Ryan Hamill and Josh Gibbs, I think was the other one in that. And their overall topic was all education is political. And so it was an interesting, and I think it was an intentionally, not inflammatory is too broad a word, but they knew it was going to be a controversial thing to say. And when they got into it and they defined political, what they meant by that was that all education is aimed at teaching people how to order society for the good life, which is an Aristotelian kind of definition of that. And so when you have classical education, what you're doing is you're forming the kids and shaping them and guiding them in such a way that their understanding of what the good life is not, hey, I want to be a Twitch streamer or I want to get rich on being a whatever YouTuber. Like they don't see necessarily fame and fortune as the good life. I'm sure that they're tempted by that, the same as everyone else, but they can hopefully look at the world and say, I hope to have a family. I hope to put food on the table.
They can see past it.
Yeah. They recognize that there's something more and better and fundamental. But what you're trying to get at, like really down at the core there, is like, this is what the good life is. And public schools are not equipped to even tell them that. So the kids are just adrift. Mm-hmm. And they're the way that they're getting that, because everybody wants to know the answer to that question. Where they're getting it is on TikTok and, what do their friends say? What are their, And it seems like having a nice car is fun, so I should get money for that. I should do this thing and that thing, and they're just kind of adrift. And with classical, you're really anchored, and you've got a way to say, like, look, our people, Christians and American Christians, and in our case, Tennessee Christians, have said the good life looks like this. Now let's discuss that and let's evaluate it. So they've got a context for knowing, like, what has made my people happy in the past. And it
you
is
teach
kingdom
them that
building.
past correctly
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, and Jason, one other thought that your comment sparked, I think that in the Christian community, to criticize ourselves a little bit, at sometimes in the past we have poo-pooed ambition. You said, classical schools are going to create kids who want to, like, build the kingdom. They're motivated by that. You're touching on godly ambition, and I think that oftentimes conservative evangelicals have failed to have a category for what godly ambition looks like, or they think it's purely like they don't understand that it means, like, the correct ordering of all of these things, like have a family, provide for your family, have a community, church community, neighbors, business, school that you're providing for. Like, it's a good ambition to say, I want to provide for all of those things. But it's all subject to these things that, like, I mean, ultimately, like, God has told us are part of the good life. This is how it's how he wants us to live as creatures in this world. And when we follow, like, his ways, we're happier and healthier, and it blesses, everybody around us. And, like, to have an ambition for that, I think that, at times evangelicals have been prone to sort of jump purely to the spiritual aspects, right? It's just about evangelism. And they forget that all of those other things along the way are, like, some of the most effective evangelistic tools. Like, your kids are your first mission field, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, before you go overseas or do anything else, like, evangelism starts in your own house and, like, how you disciple and raise your kids. And then, of course it spills out to your neighbor, and it spills out, to the broader community from there to the ends of the world. But you got to have everything in the right, order. And you got to understand what's the good life look like, that we need to have an ambition for, like, securing that, for making sure that we're going to provide that for the next generation.
Yeah, and in some cases that means somebody's going to have to go make a bunch of money, right? Or find themselves in a position of power.
Yeah, many times it will mean that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it should not be just for its own sake. It should be for what you're talking about, right?
Well, an oversimplification that I recently learned is there are two kingdoms. One kingdom is creative and constructive. The other kingdom is destructive. That's an oversimplification, of course, but that's one way to parse yourself for the viewpoint of distinguishing the different directives in the kingdoms. Mm-hmm. The outlook that our kids will have, if they look towards God's kingdom and realize that that is a constructive and ordered, just a way of life.
Yeah.
That's like, it reminds me of Augustine, right? And the two cities, two kingdoms, they're defined by their different loves, and the earthly kingdom is defined by disordered loves. Like it elevates certain things over others. It elevates power, money, or sex or whatever for their own sake, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, the Christian way of life puts those things in the proper order. Mm-hmm. They're serving the right ends. And really the definition of, like, sin, I mean, in some ways is, like, applying the wrong order to things, like elevating certain created things over the creator, or over the way in which the creator designed for them to be used. Like, the disorder is really, like, the chief. I mean, I guess to put it really bluntly, like, kids coming out of a lot of public education aren't getting formed into the right. They're not being taught how to order, like, their loves, to orient their ambition toward the right things.
Well, they're being taught that disorder is good in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
That the things that we value ordered is to be looked down on, and the way we ordered it, the way God orders it, I should say, is looked down on.
Yeah.
So their version of order is actually disorder.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, do we need to talk about the gloves again? Okay.
We can. Have you been able to use your gloves?
I have actually used them quite a bit. A lot of firewood
We
handling.
have a sponsor.
We have, we have a
Oh, really?
sponsor.
Oh,
yes,
good.
you should get a pair of these gloves. This is Bare Knuckles.
Cool.
BEAR.
Yeah, like the animal. And they make all kinds of gloves, work gloves. I think they started with rodeo gloves. And
That's correct.
Then they kind of expanded to, kind of heavy duty, like lineman repair gloves, and just the kind that they sent us some. And I've been wearing this pair of buffalo hide gloves, work gloves, and I don't wear any others anymore, basically. So I handled a lot of firewood over the break because we had some snow and ice around here, and I always look for those when I went out there to get the firewood and bring it in. It was nice.
Yeah, but they continue to impress me, just the quality and everything. And if you enter Issachar in your checkout, then you get 15% off.
Yeah, support these good people and support the show that way. So, Josh, we thank you for coming on. This has been a good time, and hopefully enlightening and opening some people's minds to reevaluate the goals that you have for your kids and really think big in some cases, and be thinking about that for yourself too. I mean, it may be too late for an adult to think about going to Harvard, but there's other ways to strive for excellence and for that to be recognized, and to order your loves rightly. Use that to the benefit of the furtherance of the kingdom of heaven.
Thanks, Josh, for being with us.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the Men of Issachar podcast. If you have any topics you'd like to see us cover or any questions, please shoot us an email at issacharpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Also, visit buybareknuckles.com and check out all their selection for gloves. They continue to impress us, and we'll provide you a link in the description so you can follow that, and it will enter in all the pertinent information. But if not, just enter in Issachar in the checkout, and you'll get 15% off. We appreciate you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again very soon.